Captain Rebecca Martinez had dreamed of flying since she was 7 years old, watching jets streak across the Arizona sky from her grandmother's backyard. 23 years later, she stood at the entrance of Randolph Air Force Base, her freshly pressed uniform crisp in the Texas heat. Today marked her first day as the newest pilot in the 12th Fighter Squadron, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had fought for every opportunity. The squadron briefing room buzzed with the usual morning chatter when Rebecca entered. Conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned toward the door. She had expected this reaction. She was one of only 3 women in the entire squadron, and the only Latina. What she hadn't expected was the slow, deliberate clap that started from the back corner of the room. Colonel James Whitmore, the squadron commander, stood with his arms crossed, a condescending smile playing at the corners of his mouth. At 52, he was a veteran of 3 deployments and had the kind of swagger that came from decades of unchallenged authority. His steel-gray hair was perfectly styled, and his chest bore enough ribbons to stock a small parade. "Well, well," Colonel Whitmore drawled, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "Look what the diversity program dragged in. I hope you're better at flying than you are at timing, Captain Martinez. You're 3 minutes late to my briefing." Rebecca checked her watch. She was actually 2 minutes early, but she bit back her response. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting in public. "My apologies, sir. It won't happen again." "I'm sure it won't," Whitmore replied, his tone dripping with false concern. "Because I run a tight ship here and I don't have time to babysit pilots who can't handle the pressure. This isn't flight school anymore, sweetheart. This is the real deal." The room remained uncomfortably quiet. Rebecca could feel the eyes of her fellow pilots burning into her back. Some looked sympathetic, others merely curious about how this confrontation would play out. She had faced similar situations before, instructors who questioned her abilities, fellow cadets who assumed she was there to fill a quota rather than because she had earned her wings. "I understand completely, sir," Rebecca replied evenly. "I'm here to fly and to serve my country. Nothing more, nothing less." Colonel Whitmore's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "We'll see about that, Captain. Flying a desk is different from flying an F-16. But don't worry, I'll make sure you get plenty of opportunities to prove yourself, starting with today's training exercise." He turned to address the room, but his words were clearly meant for Rebecca. "Today we're running precision formation maneuvers over the Gulf. It's technical flying that requires absolute concentration and flawless execution. No room for error, no participation trophies. Either you can handle it or you can't." The briefing continued with tactical details, weather conditions, and safety protocols. Rebecca took notes meticulously, aware that every move she made was being scrutinized. She had graduated third in her class from flight school, had over 800 hours of flight time, and had received commendations for her precision flying. But none of that seemed to matter here. As the pilots filed out to prepare for the mission, Colonel Whitmore called out to Rebecca, "Captain Martinez, a word." She approached his desk, maintaining eye contact despite the intimidating glare he was giving her. "Yes, sir." "Let me make something crystal clear," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I don't care what your test scores were or how many diversity awards you collected in flight school. In my squadron, you earn respect through performance, not through political correctness. Today's exercise will separate the real pilots from the pretenders." Rebecca felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever challenge you have, sir." "Good, because I'm assigning you to fly wing position with Major Davidson. He's our best pilot and he doesn't slow down for anyone. Try to keep up." The dismissal was clear, but Rebecca didn't move immediately. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, and she wasn't about to let Colonel Whitmore's prejudice define her career before it even began. Major Tom Davidson was waiting by the aircraft when Rebecca arrived at the flight line. Unlike his commanding officer, Davidson's greeting was professional and respectful. He was a compact man in his mid-30s with intelligent brown eyes and a reputation for being one of the most skilled pilots in the Air Force. "Captain Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard good things about your flying from the instructors at flight school. Colonel Henderson spoke very highly of your aerobatic skills." Rebecca shook his hand, grateful for the first genuine welcome she had received all day. "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to flying with you." The feeling's mutual. Today's exercise is challenging, but I have confidence you'll handle it well. We'll be flying in tight formation, executing precision turns and altitude changes. The key is smooth communication and absolute trust in your wingman. As they conducted their pre-flight checks, Rebecca noticed Colonel Whitmore watching from the tower. His arms were crossed, and even from this distance, she could see the skeptical expression on his face. She had no doubt that he was expecting her to fail, probably hopping for it. The F-16 felt like coming home as Rebecca settled into the cockpit. The familiar weight of her helmet, the responsive touch of the controls, the rumble of the engine, this was where she belonged. All the politics and posturing on the ground melted away when she was in the air. "Viper 1, this is Viper 2 ready for taxi," she called over the radio, using Davidson's call sign. "Roger, Viper 2. Follow my lead to runway 27. Tower, this is Viper Flight requesting clearance for takeoff." The tower's response crackled through their headsets. "Viper Flight, cleared for takeoff. Winds 270 at 8 knots. Contact departure on 124.7. Rebecca's takeoff was flawless, her aircraft lifting off the runway with textbook precision. She smoothly moved into formation with Davidson, maintaining the exact spacing required for the day's maneuvers. The Gulf of Mexico spread out below them, a vast expanse of blue-green water that stretched to the horizon. "Nice flying, Viper 2, Davidson's voice came through the radio. "You're holding formation perfectly, ready for the first sequence." "Roger, Viper 1, ready when you are." What followed was 30 minutes of the most challenging flying Rebecca had experienced since flight school. Davidson led them through a series of complex maneuvers that tested every aspect of their flying skills. They performed barrel rolls in formation, executed precision turns at high speed, and practiced emergency separation procedures. Throughout it all, Rebecca's flying was flawless. She anticipated Davidson's every move, maintained perfect spacing, and executed each maneuver with the kind of precision that only came from natural talent combined with extensive training. By the time they returned to base, she had proven that she belonged in the cockpit of an F-16. As they taxied back to the flight line, Davidson's voice came over the radio one final time. "Outstanding flying today, Viper 2. That was some of the best formation work I've seen from any pilot, regardless of experience level." Rebecca felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. She had passed the first test, but she knew that Colonel Whitmore would find other ways to challenge her. The real question was whether her performance today would be enough to earn even a grudging respect from her commanding officer. As she climbed out of her aircraft, Rebecca could see Colonel Whitmore approaching across the tarmac. His expression was unreadable, but she had learned not to expect praise from him. Instead, she focused on the sense of accomplishment that came from knowing she had flown perfectly when it mattered most. The mission debrief took place in the squadron's conference room, with all the pilots gathered around a large table. Colonel Whitmore stood at the front, reviewing the day's training objectives and discussing areas for improvement. When he reached Rebecca's performance, he paused for a long moment. "Captain Martinez," he said finally, "your flying today was adequate. You managed to keep up with Major Davidson, which is more than I expected for your first day. However, adequate isn't good enough in this squadron. We demand excellence, not mediocrity." Rebecca felt the familiar sting of unfair criticism, but she kept her expression neutral. Around the table, she could see several pilots shifting uncomfortably. It was clear to everyone that her flying had been far better than adequate. It had been exceptional. "I understand, sir," she replied. "I'll continue to work hard to meet your standards." "See that you do," Whitmore said curtly. "Because tomorrow we're moving on to advanced tactical maneuvers. The training wheels come off, and we separate the real pilots from the wannabes. As the debrief concluded and the pilots filed out, Major Davidson approached Rebecca. "Don't let him get to you," he said quietly. "Your flying today was textbook perfect. I've flown with pilots who have twice your experience and couldn't hold formation half as well." Rebecca appreciated the support, but she also knew that words of encouragement wouldn't change Colonel Whitmore's attitude. She was going to have to prove herself repeatedly, and each test would likely be more challenging than the last. That evening, Rebecca sat in her small apartment off base, reviewing the day's events. She had expected resistance and prejudice. It came with the territory of being a woman in a male-dominated field. But Colonel Whitmore's hostility went beyond casual bias. He seemed personally invested in seeing her fail, and that made him dangerous. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger brother Miguel, who was studying engineering at Texas A&M. "How was your first day as a hotshot fighter pilot?" he asked. Rebecca smiled as she typed back. "Interesting. Met my commanding officer. He's a real piece of work. The old-school type who thinks women shouldn't fly jets." "That's putting it mildly, but I'll handle it. I always do." "I know you will. You've been proving people wrong your whole life. This is just another day at the office." Her brother's confidence meant more to her than he probably realized. Rebecca had been the first person in her family to attend college, the first to join the military, and now the first to become a pilot. Each step had required fighting against expectations and overcoming obstacles that others never faced. The next morning brought another briefing, another opportunity for Colonel Whitmore to demonstrate his disdain for her presence in his squadron. This time, the training exercise involved single-ship aerobatic maneuvers, a complex flying that would test each pilot's individual skills rather than their ability to work as a team. "Today we're focusing on precision aerobatics," Colonel Whitmore announced to the assembled pilots. "Each of you will perform a series of maneuvers that will be graded on accuracy, smoothness, and recovery time. This is where we separate the natural pilots from those who scraped through flight school on luck and lowered standards." His eyes found Rebecca as he spoke those last words, making his meaning unmistakably clear. She had heard variations of this speech her entire career, the suggestion that her achievements were somehow less legitimate because of her gender or ethnicity. "Captain Martinez," he continued, "since you're so eager to prove yourself, you'll go first. I want to see a perfect Cuban 8, followed by a 4-point roll, and finishing with a split S. Any questions?" Rebecca stood up, her spine straight and her voice steady. "No questions, sir. I'm ready." "Good, because I'll be watching from the tower, and I expect military precision. One mistake, and you'll be riding a desk for the rest of your assignment here." The threat was clear, but Rebecca had faced similar ultimatums before. She knew that Colonel Whitmore was setting her up for failure, giving her the most challenging sequence of maneuvers and the highest stakes. But she also knew that she was fully capable of executing every movement he had requested. As she walked to her aircraft, Rebecca felt the weight of expectation from her fellow pilots. Some were rooting for her to succeed. Others were simply curious to see how she would handle the pressure. A few, she suspected, were hoping she would fail so that the squadron could return to its comfortable, familiar dynamic. The pre-flight check was routine, but Rebecca took extra time to ensure that every system was operating perfectly. She couldn't afford any mechanical issues that might be blamed on pilot error. When she was satisfied that the aircraft was ready, she climbed into the cockpit and began her startup sequence. Tower, this is Viper 2 requesting clearance for aerobatic practice area Alpha. She called over the radio. Viper 2 cleared to practice area Alpha. Maintain altitude above 5,000 feet. Report when complete. Rebecca taxied to the runway, her mind already visualizing the maneuvers she would perform. The Cuban 8 was a complex figure-8 pattern flown vertically, requiring precise timing and smooth control inputs. The four-point roll involved rotating the aircraft through 4 quarter turns while maintaining straight and level flight. The split S was a half loop followed by a half roll, ending with the aircraft flying in the opposite direction at a lower altitude. Each maneuver was challenging on its own, but performing them in sequence with the precision that Colonel Whitmore demanded would require every bit of her skill and training. As her F-16 lifted off the runway, Rebecca felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-stakes flying. The aircraft responded to her touch like a perfectly tuned instrument, climbing smoothly toward the practice area. Below, the Texas landscape stretched out in all directions, a patchwork of fields and small towns that looked like toys from her altitude. Tower, this is Viper 2 approaching practice area Alpha, she called as she reached the designated airspace. Roger, Viper 2. You are cleared for aerobatic maneuvers. Be advised, weather is clear with light winds from the southwest. Rebecca took a deep breath and began her sequence. The Cuban 8 started with a climb, pulling the aircraft up into a steep ascent before rolling inverted at the top. She had to maintain perfect airspeed and altitude control while executing the complex series of loops and rolls that formed the figure-8 pattern. Her execution was flawless. The aircraft traced perfect arcs through the sky, each transition smooth and controlled. She could feel the G-forces pressing against her body, but her training had prepared her for the physical demands of aerobatic flying. The four-point roll came next, and Rebecca demonstrated the precise control that had made her instructors take notice during flight school. She rolled the aircraft through 4 perfect quarter turns, pausing at each point to ensure that her wings were exactly level before continuing to the next position. Finally, the split S, a maneuver that required pulling the aircraft into a half loop before rolling upright and recovering at a lower altitude. Rebecca executed it with textbook precision, the aircraft responding instantly to her control inputs. Tower, this is Viper 2. Aerobatic sequence complete, returning to base, she called over the radio. Roger, Viper 2. Outstanding flying, clear to return to base. As Rebecca flew back toward Randolph Air Force Base, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had performed every maneuver perfectly, demonstrating the kind of precision that Colonel Whitmore claimed to value. The question was whether he would acknowledge her skill or find new ways to diminish her achievement. The landing was as smooth as silk, the aircraft touching down exactly on the center line of the runway. Rebecca taxied back to the flight line, where she could see Colonel Whitmore waiting with his arms crossed and his usual skeptical expression. "Well, Captain Martinez," he said as she climbed out of the cockpit, "that was certainly interesting. Your Cuban 8 was sloppy, your 4-point roll was uneven, and your split S recovery was 10 feet too low. In my day, we called that kind of flying dangerous." Rebecca felt her jaw clench, but she kept her voice professional. "Sir, I believe my execution was within acceptable parameters. My altimeter readings showed precise altitude control throughout the sequence." "Are you questioning my assessment, Captain?" Colonel Whitmore's voice carried a dangerous edge. "No, sir. I'm simply providing the data from my instruments." "Your instruments can lie, but my eyes don't. I've been flying for 30 years and I know substandard flying when I see it. You'll repeat the sequence tomorrow, and this time I expect improvement." As Colonel Whitmore walked away, Rebecca stood beside her aircraft, processing what had just happened. She had flown a perfect sequence, demonstrating the kind of precision that any reasonable observer would have praised. But Colonel Whitmore seemed determined to find fault regardless of her actual performance. Major Davidson approached, shaking his head with obvious frustration. "I was watching from the tower," he said quietly. "Your flying was absolutely perfect. I've never seen a cleaner Cuban 8 and your 4-point roll was textbook. Don't let him get in your head." Rebecca appreciated the support, but she also knew that Major Davidson couldn't protect her from Colonel Whitmore's prejudice. She was going to have to find a way to prove herself so conclusively that even her commanding officer couldn't deny her abilities. That evening, Rebecca called her mentor from flight school, Colonel Sarah Henderson, who had become something of a mother figure during her training. Colonel Henderson had faced similar challenges during her own career and had valuable advice about dealing with difficult commanders. "Rebecca," Colonel Henderson said warmly. I heard through the grapevine that you're having some issues with Colonel Whitmore. Want to talk about it? Rebecca described the past 2 days, including the unfair criticism and the obvious double standards she was facing. Colonel Henderson listened without interruption, occasionally making sympathetic sounds that showed she understood exactly what Rebecca was going through. I wish I could say this was unusual, Colonel Henderson said finally, but unfortunately, there are still commanders who think women don't belong in fighter cockpits. The good news is that excellence is hard to argue with. You need to fly so well that his bias becomes obvious to everyone around him. I thought I was already doing that, Rebecca replied. My flying has been perfect, but he keeps finding ways to criticize it. Then you need to raise the bar even higher. Find an opportunity to demonstrate skills that go beyond what he's asking for. Make it impossible for him to ignore your abilities. Rebecca thought about that advice as she prepared for another day of training. Colonel Whitmore was clearly determined to make her life difficult, but she had faced adversity before and overcome it. The key was finding the right moment to prove herself in a way that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. The next morning brought news that would provide exactly the opportunity she needed. During the squadron briefing, Colonel Whitmore announced that they would be participating in a joint training exercise with a visiting squadron from Nellis Air Force Base. The exercise would include advanced air-to-air combat maneuvers, and each pilot would be evaluated on their performance. This is a chance for our squadron to show what we're made of, Colonel Whitmore said, his voice filled with pride. The pilots from Nellis think they're hot shots, but we're going to show them what real flying looks like. Rebecca listened intently as he outlined the exercise. It would involve multiple aircraft engaging in simulated combat, with pilots scored on their ability to achieve kills while avoiding being shot down themselves. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes flying that she excelled at. Captain Martinez, Colonel Whitmore said, singling her out once again, I'm assigning you to the second wave. Try not to embarrass us in front of our visitors. Rebecca nodded, understanding that this was another test designed to highlight her supposed inadequacies. But she also recognized it as an opportunity to demonstrate her skills in a setting where Colonel Whitmore couldn't simply dismiss her performance as adequate. The visiting pilots from Nellis arrived that afternoon, and Rebecca was impressed by their professionalism and obvious competence. They were led by Lieutenant Colonel Mark Thompson, a veteran pilot with an outstanding reputation in the air-to-air combat community. During the joint briefing, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson outlined the exercise parameters. We'll be flying in 4-ship formations, with each pilot responsible for both offensive and defensive maneuvering. The goal is to simulate realistic combat scenarios while maintaining safety protocols. Rebecca studied the tactical situation, looking for opportunities to demonstrate her skills. The exercise would require not just flying ability, but also tactical thinking and split-second decision-making. She had always excelled at this type of complex, multidimensional flying. As the pilots prepared for the exercise, Rebecca overheard Colonel Whitmore talking to Lieutenant Colonel Thompson near the aircraft. His words made her blood run cold. "Don't expect too much from Captain Martinez," Whitmore was saying. "She's new to the squadron, and frankly, I'm not sure she's ready for this level of training. Political correctness got her this far, but real flying is different." Rebecca felt her face flush with anger, but she forced herself to focus on the upcoming exercise. Colonel Whitmore had just publicly questioned her abilities to a respected pilot from another squadron. The humiliation was intentional and calculated, designed to undermine her confidence and credibility. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's response was professional but non-committal. "I'll evaluate each pilot based on their performance in the air. That's the only fair way to do it." As Rebecca climbed into her cockpit, she knew that this exercise would be the most important flying of her career so far. Colonel Whitmore had raised the stakes by questioning her abilities in front of the visiting pilots. Now she had to prove him wrong in the most public way possible. The exercise began with standard formation flying, but quickly escalated to complex tactical maneuvers. Rebecca found herself engaged in simulated combat with multiple opponents, requiring her to think strategically while executing precise flying maneuvers. Her training took over, and she began to demonstrate the kind of flying that had made her instructors take notice during flight school. She used her aircraft's capabilities to maximum advantage, executing tight turns and rapid altitude changes that kept her opponents guessing. Within minutes, she had scored her first simulated kill, successfully positioning herself behind an opponent and maintaining the targeting solution required for a successful engagement. The radio crackled with acknowledgement from the exercise controllers. "Viper 2 kill confirmed on Raider 3. Nice flying." Rebecca allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, but she knew that one kill wouldn't be enough to prove her point. She needed to dominate the exercise in a way that would make Colonel Whitmore's prejudice impossible to ignore. The second engagement came quickly, with Rebecca finding herself in a defensive position against two opponents. This was exactly the kind of situation that separated good pilots from great ones. She had to use every bit of her skill and training to avoid being eliminated while positioning herself for a counterattack. Her solution was both brilliant and audacious. Instead of trying to outrun her opponents, She executed a series of vertical maneuvers that used her aircraft's superior climb rate to gain an advantage. Within seconds, she had reversed the situation, turning from prey to predator. Viper 2, dual kill confirmed on Raider 5 and Raider 7. Outstanding maneuvering. The radio chatter from the other pilots made it clear that her flying was impressing everyone involved in the exercise. But Rebecca wasn't finished yet. She had identified the exercise's most challenging opponent, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson himself, flying as Raider 1. The engagement that followed was a masterclass in tactical flying. Both pilots demonstrated exceptional skill, executing maneuvers that pushed their aircraft to the limits of performance. Rebecca found herself in the fight of her life against an opponent who had decades of experience and an outstanding reputation. The battle ranged across thousands of feet of altitude and covered miles of airspace. Both pilots used every trick in their repertoire, from high-G turns to defensive spirals. Rebecca's youth and reflexes proved to be advantages, but Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's experience kept him competitive. In the end, Rebecca's victory came through a combination of patience and tactical brilliance. She allowed Thompson to believe he had gained the advantage, then executed a maneuver that reversed their positions in a matter of seconds. The simulated missile shot was perfect, and the exercise controllers confirmed the kill. Viper 2, kill confirmed on Raider 1, exercise complete. As the aircraft returned to base, Rebecca knew that she had just delivered the kind of performance that would be impossible to dismiss or minimize. She had not only survived against multiple opponents, but had dominated the exercise in a way that showcased her exceptional flying abilities. The debrief that followed was unlike any she had experienced since joining the squadron. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, despite being on the receiving end of her final kill, was effusive in his praise. "Captain Martinez," he said, addressing the room full of pilots, "that was some of the finest tactical flying I've seen in 20 years of service. Your maneuvering was creative, your execution was flawless, and your tactical thinking was absolutely brilliant." Rebecca felt a surge of pride and vindication. The praise was coming from one of the most respected pilots in the Air Force, and it was being delivered in front of her entire squadron. Even Colonel Whitmore couldn't dismiss or minimize this kind of recognition. But Colonel Whitmore was determined to try. As the formal debrief concluded, he approached Rebecca with his usual skeptical expression. "Well, Captain Martinez," he said, his voice carrying its familiar edge of condescension, "I suppose you think you're pretty hot stuff after today's performance." Rebecca looked him directly in the eye, her voice steady and confident. "I think I demonstrated that I belong in this squadron, sir. I flew well today, and I'm proud of my performance." One good day doesn't make a career, Colonel Whitmore replied. But I suppose it's a start. Don't let it go to your head. As he walked away, Rebecca realized that Colonel Whitmore would never acknowledge her abilities, no matter how well she performed. His prejudice was too deeply ingrained, his ego too invested in proving her inadequate. But she also knew that she had achieved something important today. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that she belonged in the cockpit of an F-16. The next few weeks brought a subtle but noticeable change in the squadron's dynamic. Rebecca's exceptional performance in the joint exercise had earned her respect from her fellow pilots, and even some of Colonel Whitmore's supporters began to question his assessment of her abilities. Major Davidson became an informal mentor, sharing tactical insights and providing the kind of professional support that Rebecca had been missing. Other pilots began including her in their conversations and asking for her opinions on flying techniques. But Colonel Whitmore remained determined to prove that her success was temporary. He began assigning her the most challenging and dangerous training missions, hoping to find a situation where she would finally fail and validate his prejudices. Rebecca welcomed the additional challenges. Each difficult assignment was an opportunity to demonstrate her skills and build her reputation within the squadron. She approached every mission with the same meticulous preparation and flawless execution that had made her stand out during flight school. The tension between Rebecca and Colonel Whitmore reached a breaking point during a routine training flight in late October. The mission involved practicing emergency procedures, including engine failure scenarios that required immediate and precise responses. Rebecca was flying solo, practicing single-engine approaches when she noticed unusual readings on her engine instruments. Her training kicked in immediately, and she began running through the appropriate checklists while preparing for an emergency landing. "Tower, this is Viper 2 declaring an emergency," she called over the radio. "I'm showing engine fire warning lights and unusual vibrations, requesting priority landing clearance." The response was immediate and professional. "Viper 2, Tower copies your emergency. You are cleared for priority landing on runway 27. Emergency vehicles are responding." Rebecca's training had prepared her for this moment, but the reality of dealing with an actual emergency was still intense. She had to balance the immediate need to land the aircraft safely with the procedures designed to minimize damage and ensure her survival. Her execution was textbook perfect. She configured the aircraft for single-engine flight, maintained proper airspeed and altitude, and executed a flawless approach and landing. The emergency vehicles were waiting as she taxied clear of the runway, but her quick thinking and skilled flying had prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation. The post-flight investigation revealed that Rebecca had indeed experienced a legitimate engine emergency that could have resulted in fire or complete power loss. Her quick recognition of the problem and immediate response had prevented a potentially dangerous situation from becoming a disaster. Colonel Whitmore's response to Rebecca's emergency handling was predictably dismissive. Any competent pilot should be able to handle a routine engine problem, he said during the incident debrief. This wasn't heroics, it was just basic flying. But other pilots in the squadron saw the situation differently. They recognized that Rebecca's quick thinking and skilled execution had demonstrated exactly the kind of professionalism and competence that the Air Force valued. Her reputation continued to grow, even as Colonel Whitmore's credibility began to suffer. The breaking point came in November, when the squadron received orders to participate in a major training exercise at Nellis Air Force Base. The exercise would involve pilots from multiple squadrons competing in complex air-to-air and air-to-ground scenarios. Colonel Whitmore announced the selection of pilots who would represent the squadron in the exercise. Rebecca's name was notably absent from the list, despite her obvious qualifications and recent outstanding performance. "Sir," Major Davidson said during the briefing, "shouldn't Captain Martinez be included in the exercise? Her flying has been exceptional, and she has the tactical skills that would be valuable in this type of competition." Colonel Whitmore's response was sharp and dismissive. "I select pilots based on experience and proven performance under pressure. Captain Martinez is still too new and untested for an exercise of this magnitude." The room fell silent. Every pilot present knew that Rebecca's performance had been consistently outstanding, and many of them had less experience than she did. Colonel Whitmore's decision was clearly based on personal bias rather than professional judgment. Rebecca felt the familiar sting of discrimination, but she also recognized that this might be the moment that finally exposed Colonel Whitmore's prejudice to higher authority. She had been documenting his biased treatment since her arrival, and this latest incident would be difficult for him to justify. That evening, Rebecca made a decision that would change the trajectory of her career. She requested a meeting with Colonel Whitmore's superior, Brigadier General Patricia Chen, who commanded the wing that included Rebecca's squadron. General Chen was a pioneering aviator who had broken numerous barriers during her own career. She was known for her fairness and her commitment to ensuring that all pilots were evaluated based on their abilities rather than their demographics. "Captain Martinez," General Chen said when Rebecca entered her office, "I understand you wanted to discuss some concerns about your squadron assignment." Rebecca had prepared carefully for this meeting, organizing her documentation and thinking through her arguments. She knew that she had to present her case professionally and factually, without appearing to be simply complaining about unfair treatment. "Yes, ma'am. I believe I'm being evaluated based on factors other than my flying performance and professional competence." General Chen leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "That's a significant allegation, Captain. I'll need to hear specifics." Rebecca outlined the pattern of biased treatment she had experienced since joining the squadron. She provided specific examples of Colonel Whitmore's discriminatory comments, his unfair criticism of her flying, and his decision to exclude her from the upcoming exercise despite her qualifications. "I have documentation of my performance evaluations," Rebecca continued, "including recordings of radio communications during training exercises and witness statements from other pilots who have observed Colonel Whitmore's treatment of me." General Chen reviewed the materials Rebecca had prepared, her expression growing more serious with each page. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, showing a clear pattern of discrimination that violated Air Force policies and values. "Captain Martinez," General Chen said finally, "I want you to know that I take these allegations very seriously. The Air Force has zero tolerance for discrimination, and every pilot deserves to be evaluated based on their abilities and performance." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. For the first time since joining the squadron, she felt like someone in authority was taking her concerns seriously and was prepared to take action. "I'm going to conduct a formal investigation into these allegations," General Chen continued. "In the meantime, I want you to continue performing your duties to the best of your ability. Don't let this situation affect your flying or your commitment to the mission." Rebecca left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. She had taken a significant risk by going over Colonel Whitmore's head, but she believed that she had no choice. The discrimination she was facing was affecting not just her career, but also her ability to serve effectively. The investigation that followed was thorough and professional. General Chen interviewed other pilots in the squadron, reviewed training records, and analyzed the documentation that Rebecca had provided. The evidence of discriminatory treatment was overwhelming and undeniable. Colonel Whitmore was called in for a formal interview, where he was confronted with the evidence of his biased behavior. His attempts to justify his actions were unconvincing and only served to reinforce the conclusion that he had been discriminating against Rebecca. "Colonel Whitmore," General Chen said during their final meeting, "the evidence clearly shows that you have been treating Captain Martinez differently than other pilots in your squadron. Your comments about diversity programs and political correctness are inappropriate and unprofessional." Colonel Whitmore's response was defensive and revealed the depth of his prejudice. "General, I've been flying for 30 years, and I know what it takes to be a successful fighter pilot. Some people just don't have what it takes, regardless of their test scores or political connections. Colonel Captain Martinez has consistently demonstrated exceptional flying skills and professional competence. Your failure to recognize her abilities says more about your limitations than hers. The consequences for Colonel Whitmore were swift and severe. He was removed from command of the squadron and assigned to a desk job pending retirement. The Air Force made it clear that his discriminatory behavior was unacceptable and would not be tolerated. Rebecca was not only included in the Nellies exercise, but was selected as one of the squadron's primary representatives. Her performance in the exercise was outstanding, and she earned recognition as one of the top pilots in the competition. But the real vindication came 6 months later, when Rebecca was selected for the Air Force's prestigious test pilot school. The selection was based purely on her flying abilities and professional competence, and it represented the kind of career opportunity that she had dreamed about since childhood. As she prepared to leave for her new assignment, Rebecca reflected on the lessons she had learned during her time at Randolph Air Force Base. She had faced discrimination and prejudice, but she had also discovered the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up for what was right. Major Davidson, who had become a trusted friend and mentor, offered some final advice as she prepared to depart. "You've handled this situation with class and professionalism," he said. "You've shown that excellence is the best response to prejudice." Rebecca's story became something of a legend within the Air Force, inspiring other women and minorities who faced similar challenges. Her success demonstrated that talent and determination could overcome even the most entrenched prejudices. The new squadron commander, Colonel Maria Rodriguez, was a stark contrast to her predecessor. She evaluated all pilots based on their abilities and performance, creating an environment where everyone could succeed regardless of their background. Captain Martinez set a standard for this squadron, Colonel Rodriguez said during Rebecca's farewell ceremony. She demonstrated that excellence speaks louder than prejudice, and that true leadership means recognizing talent wherever it exists. Rebecca's departure from Randolph Air Force Base marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Test Pilot School represented the pinnacle of military aviation, where only the most skilled and dedicated pilots were selected to push the boundaries of flight technology. As she drove away from the base for the last time, Rebecca thought about Colonel Whitmore and wondered if he had learned anything from the experience. She suspected that he probably blamed everyone except himself for his downfall, but she also knew that his removal from command had sent a clear message throughout the Air Force. The first day at test pilot school was both exciting and intimidating. Rebecca found herself surrounded by some of the most accomplished pilots in the military, each selected for their exceptional skills and potential contributions to aviation development. The Commandant, Brigadier General Robert Hayes, addressed the new class with words that resonated deeply with Rebecca's own experience. You are here because you have demonstrated not just flying ability, but also the intellectual curiosity and professional courage needed to advance the science of flight. Your job is to take risks, push boundaries, and expand the envelope of what's possible. Rebecca's performance at test pilot school was exceptional from the beginning. She excelled in both the academic coursework and the practical flight testing, demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking and precise execution that define the best test pilots. Her first major project involved testing modifications to the F-16's flight control system, work that required both technical expertise and the kind of precision flying that had become her trademark. The project was challenging and potentially dangerous, but Rebecca approached it with the same meticulous preparation that had served her throughout her career. The test flights were conducted over the Mojave Desert, where the clear skies and vast open spaces provided ideal conditions for experimental flying. Rebecca found herself pushing the aircraft to its limits, exploring flight regimes that had never been tested before. During one particularly challenging test flight, Rebecca encountered a situation that would have defeated a less skilled pilot. The modified flight control system began behaving erratically at high altitude, creating unpredictable aircraft responses that threatened to result in loss of control. Her response was both instinctive and brilliant. Instead of trying to fight the erratic behavior, she worked with it, using her understanding of aerodynamics and aircraft systems to maintain control while gathering the data needed to diagnose the problem. Edwards Tower, this is Test 7 declaring an emergency, she called over the radio. I'm experiencing flight control anomalies and need priority landing clearance. The response was immediate and professional. Test 7, Tower copies your emergency. You are cleared for priority landing on runway 04. Emergency vehicles are responding. Rebecca's landing was flawless despite the compromised flight controls, and her detailed debriefing provided the engineering team with crucial data that led to important improvements in the system design. The incident reinforced Rebecca's reputation as an exceptional test pilot, but it also highlighted the risks inherent in experimental flying. She had survived a situation that could have been catastrophic, and her professional handling of the emergency had contributed valuable knowledge to the program. As her time at test pilot school progressed, Rebecca began to develop a specialty in high-performance fighter aircraft testing. Her combination of tactical flying experience and technical knowledge made her particularly valuable for projects involving advanced weapons systems and avionics. One of her most significant contributions involved testing a new radar system that promised to give fighter pilots unprecedented situational awareness. The system was revolutionary in its capabilities, but it also required extensive testing to ensure that it would perform reliably in combat conditions. Rebecca's test flights took her to the edges of the aircraft's performance envelope, where she evaluated the radar system's ability to track multiple targets while executing complex tactical maneuvers. The work was intellectually demanding and physically challenging, requiring her to think strategically while flying at the limits of human endurance. Her final report on the radar system became a model for technical writing within the test pilot community. She had managed to explain complex technical concepts in clear, accessible language, while providing the detailed analysis that engineers needed to refine the system. The success of the radar project led to Rebecca's selection for an even more challenging assignment: testing the prototype of an advanced stealth fighter that represented the cutting edge of military aviation technology. The aircraft was unlike anything she had flown before, with revolutionary design features that made it nearly invisible to enemy radar while maintaining exceptional flight performance. The test program would push both the aircraft and its pilots to their absolute limits. Rebecca's first flight in the stealth fighter was both exhilarating and sobering. The aircraft's capabilities were extraordinary, but she also recognized the immense responsibility that came with testing such advanced technology. The data she collected would determine whether the aircraft was ready for operational deployment. Over the course of several months, Rebecca flew dozens of test flights, each one exploring different aspects of the aircraft's performance. She tested its stealth characteristics, its maneuverability, its weapons systems, and its ability to operate in various environmental conditions. Her most memorable test flight came during a simulated combat scenario, where she was tasked with penetrating a sophisticated air defense system. The mission required her to use every aspect of the aircraft's stealth capabilities, while demonstrating its effectiveness as a combat platform. The flight was a complete success, with Rebecca proving that the stealth fighter could operate effectively in heavily defended airspace. Her performance during the mission was so impressive that it was used as a demonstration for senior military leaders who were making decisions about the aircraft's future. General Hayes, the test pilot school commandant, personally congratulated Rebecca on her exceptional work. "Captain Martinez," he said, "your contributions to this program have been invaluable. You've demonstrated not just exceptional flying skills, but also the kind of analytical thinking that makes the difference between good test pilots and great ones. Rebecca's success at test pilot school opened doors to opportunities that she had never imagined. She was selected to participate in classified programs that pushed the boundaries of aviation technology, and her expertise was sought after by both military and civilian aerospace organizations. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Colonel Whitmore, her former commanding officer, requested a meeting with her during a visit to Edwards Air Force Base. Rebecca was surprised by the request, given their history, but she agreed to meet with him out of professional courtesy. Colonel Whitmore had aged noticeably since their last encounter, and his demeanor was markedly different from what she remembered. "Captain Martinez," he said, his voice lacking its former arrogance, "I wanted to apologize for my behavior when you were assigned to my squadron. I was wrong about you, and I let my prejudices cloud my judgment." Rebecca was taken aback by the unexpected apology. She had never expected Colonel Whitmore to acknowledge his mistakes, let alone apologize for them. "I've been watching your career," he continued, "and I've seen what you've accomplished. You've proven that you're not just a competent pilot but an exceptional one. I should have recognized that from the beginning." Rebecca accepted his apology with grace, understanding that it probably took considerable courage for him to admit his mistakes. She also recognized that his acknowledgement of her abilities was a form of validation that she had never expected to receive. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "I appreciate you taking the time to say that. We all make mistakes, and what matters is learning from them." Their conversation was brief but meaningful, representing a form of closure that Rebecca hadn't known she needed. Colonel Whitmore's apology didn't erase the challenges she had faced, but it did provide a sense of resolution to that difficult chapter of her career. As Rebecca's time at test pilot school drew to a close, she faced decisions about her future that would shape the rest of her military career. She had received offers from several prestigious assignments, including opportunities to work on cutting-edge aerospace projects and to serve in leadership positions. Her choice surprised many people in the aviation community. Instead of pursuing the most glamorous or high-profile assignments, Rebecca chose to return to operational flying as a squadron commander. She wanted to use her experience and expertise to mentor the next generation of military pilots. "I've learned a lot about flying and about leadership," she explained to General Hayes during their final meeting. "Now I want to use that knowledge to help other pilots reach their potential, regardless of their background or the challenges they might face." Rebecca's first command assignment was to lead a squadron of F-35 Lightning II fighters, the most advanced combat aircraft in the Air Force inventory. The assignment represented the culmination of her career progression and gave her the opportunity to apply everything she had learned about flying and leadership. Her approach to command was shaped by her own experiences with both good and bad leaders. She was determined to create an environment where every pilot could succeed based on their abilities and dedication, regardless of their gender, ethnicity, or background. The squadron she inherited had a reputation for excellence, but it also had some of the same cultural issues that she had encountered earlier in her career. Some of the senior pilots were resistant to change, and there were subtle but persistent patterns of discrimination that affected morale and performance. Rebecca addressed these issues head-on, making it clear that she would not tolerate any form of discrimination or harassment. She implemented new policies and procedures designed to ensure that all pilots were evaluated fairly and given equal opportunities to succeed. This squadron will be judged on performance, not politics, she announced during her first commander's call. Every pilot will be evaluated based on their flying ability, their professional competence, and their commitment to the mission. Nothing else matters. Her leadership style was both demanding and supportive. She set high standards for performance and professionalism, but she also provided the mentorship and guidance that helped pilots reach those standards. Her door was always open to pilots who needed advice or support, regardless of their rank or experience level. The transformation of the squadron was remarkable. Within 6 months, morale had improved dramatically, and the unit's performance metrics were among the best in the Air Force. More importantly, the squadron had become a model for diversity and inclusion, attracting talented pilots from all backgrounds. Rebecca's success as a commander did not go unnoticed. She was selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel and was given increasingly important assignments that showcased her leadership abilities and strategic thinking. One of her most significant achievements was leading the squadron during a deployment to the Middle East, where they conducted combat operations against terrorist targets. The deployment was challenging and dangerous, but Rebecca's leadership ensured that every mission was executed safely and effectively. Her pilots spoke of her with respect and admiration, recognizing that she had created an environment where excellence was expected and achieved. She had proven that diversity and inclusion were not just moral imperatives, but also strategic advantages that enhanced military effectiveness. The deployment also provided Rebecca with the opportunity to demonstrate her combat leadership abilities. She flew numerous combat missions herself, leading from the front and setting an example for her pilots. Her performance in combat earned her several decorations, including the Distinguished Flying Cross. As news of Rebecca's success spread throughout the Air Force, she became a sought-after speaker and mentor. She was invited to address audiences at military academies, professional conferences, and diversity events, sharing her experiences and insights with the next generation of leaders. Her message was always the same: excellence is the best response to prejudice, and every person has the potential to achieve great things if given the opportunity and support they need. She spoke about the importance of perseverance, the value of mentorship, and the power of leading by example. Rebecca's career continued to advance, with promotions to colonel and then brigadier general coming in rapid succession. Each new assignment brought greater responsibilities and opportunities to influence the direction of military aviation. As a general officer, Rebecca was able to implement policies and initiatives that addressed the systemic issues she had encountered throughout her career. She worked to identify and eliminate barriers to advancement for women and minorities, and she promoted mentorship programs that connected experienced leaders with emerging talent. Her efforts were not always popular with traditionalists who preferred the status quo, but Rebecca's track record of success made her difficult to ignore or dismiss. She had proven that diversity and inclusion were not just moral imperatives, but also strategic advantages that enhanced military effectiveness. One of her most important initiatives was the establishment of a comprehensive leadership development program that identified and nurtured talent from all backgrounds. The program became a model for other military organizations and helped to create a more diverse and inclusive leadership pipeline. Rebecca's influence extended beyond the military as well. She served on corporate boards, advised aerospace companies, and participated in educational initiatives designed to encourage young people to pursue careers in aviation and aerospace engineering. Her story became a case study in overcoming adversity and achieving success in the face of discrimination. She was featured in books, documentaries, and academic research that examined the challenges faced by women and minorities in male-dominated fields. But perhaps Rebecca's greatest legacy was the example she set for others who faced similar challenges. She had shown that talent and determination could overcome even the most entrenched prejudices, and that excellence was indeed the best response to discrimination. Years later, as she prepared to retire from active duty, Rebecca reflected on her career and the lessons she had learned. She had achieved success beyond her wildest dreams, but she had also paid a price for breaking barriers and challenging the status quo. The discrimination she had faced early in her career had been painful and demoralizing, but it had also made her stronger and more determined. She had learned to channel adversity into motivation, using every slight and setback as fuel for her drive to succeed. Her retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds of pilots, commanders, and dignitaries who had been touched by her leadership and inspired by her example. The speeches that day focused not just on her achievements as a pilot and commander, but on her contributions to making the military a more inclusive and effective organization. General Hayes, her former commandant at Test Pilot School, delivered the keynote address. "General Martinez," he said, "has shown us that excellence knows no gender, no race, no background. She has proven that the best leaders are those who create opportunities for others to succeed." Rebecca's final flight as an active-duty pilot was in the same type of F-16 she had flown during her early days at Randolph Air Force Base. As she climbed into the cockpit for the last time, she thought about the young captain who had first faced Colonel Whitmore's prejudice and discrimination. That young woman had dreamed of proving herself worthy of flying fighter aircraft. She had endured criticism, overcome obstacles, and ultimately achieved success that exceeded her wildest expectations. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. As Rebecca's F-16 lifted off the runway for her final flight, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. She had not only achieved her own dreams, but had also opened doors for others who would follow in her footsteps. The aircraft climbed toward the clear blue sky, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a new generation of pilots who would benefit from the barriers she had broken and the paths she had opened. Colonel Whitmore had laughed when she first entered the cockpit, but Rebecca Martinez had proven that the last laugh belonged to those who persevered in the face of adversity. Her story would continue to inspire others long after her retirement, serving as a reminder that excellence is indeed the best response to prejudice, and that determination and talent can overcome even the most entrenched obstacles. The young girl who had watched jets streak across the Arizona sky had grown up to become one of the most respected and accomplished pilots in Air Force history. Rebecca's legacy was not just her own success, but the opportunities she had created for others and the example she had set for future generations. She had shown that the sky was not the limit. It was just the beginning of what was possible when talent met opportunity and determination overcame discrimination. As she executed her final maneuver and prepared to land, Rebecca smiled at the thought of all the young pilots who would follow in her wake. They would face their own challenges and obstacles, but they would also have the advantage of knowing that others had walked this path before them and had succeeded beyond all expectations. The landing was perfect, just as Colonel Whitmore had demanded all those years ago. But this time, Rebecca was landing as a general, a leader, and a pioneer who had changed the face of military aviation forever. The colonel's laughter had long since faded, replaced by the applause of a grateful nation and the respect of her peers. Rebecca Martinez had entered the cockpit as a young captain fighting for acceptance and recognition. She was leaving it as a general who had earned both through excellence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to proving that talent knows no boundaries. Her story would continue to inspire and guide others for generations to come, ensuring that her legacy would soar as high as the aircraft she had flown with such skill and distinction.